A child walked up to strangers with an empty cup. No camera in their face. No hidden agenda. No dramatic music. Just a question so small it should never be refused. Can I have some water? This was not a charity test. No one was told they were being watched. Yet what happened next exposed something disturbing. In country after country, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and abundance, people hesitated. Some refused. Some walked away. Some explained why they couldn't. And only one country responded without thinking. This is not a story about kindness. It is a story about what modern civilization has quietly lost. And once you see it, you will never look at progress the same way again. Chapter 1. The simplest request. A child does not ask for water the way adults do. Adults negotiate even their desperation. They calculate tone, posture, and outcome. They learn which words soften rejection and which gestures invite suspicion. A child has not yet learned these performances. There is no manipulation in their voice. No politics hidden behind the request. No strategy for refusal. There is only need, undiluted, unembellished, and exposed. On a quiet afternoon, beneath a sun that paid no attention to passports or flags, a child stood holding an empty cup. No protest sign. No dramatic collapse. No rehearsed suffering. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable because it cannot be argued with. Then came the sentence, soft enough to be ignored, simple enough to be dangerous. Please, may I have some water? Not food, which invites judgment. Not money, which invites suspicion. Not sympathy, which invites performance. Water. The one thing every human body recognizes before language. The substance upon which cities are built, wars are fought, and histories are written. The element without which no economy, no ideology, no religion survives. This was not excess. This was not indulgence. This was survival, reduced to its purest form. What followed was not an experiment designed by researchers. No consent forms. No observers with clipboards. It was an unplanned audit of conscience. A moment where entire cultures were tested, not on generosity, but on instinct. Because when nothing is demanded except life itself, excuses become revelations. In that moment, refusal was not neutral. Hesitation was not harmless. Silence was not innocent. Each reaction exposed what a society truly believes about vulnerability, about who deserves help, about when responsibility begins, about how much humanity is allowed before fear intervenes. And in that quiet afternoon, with an empty cup and a single sentence, almost everyone failed. Chapter 2. When abundance becomes cruel. In wealthy streets, water did not disappear. It shimmered. Fountains pulsed behind polished stone. Lawns were irrigated on schedules more precise than human care. Restaurants served glasses heavy with ice. More water in a single pour than the child asked for in total. And yet, not a sip was offered. Not because water was scarce, but because trust had become expensive. Strangers did not respond with anger. They responded with distance. Eyes glanced, paused, then turned away, not in cruelty, but in calculation. What if this is a trick? What if this becomes my responsibility? What if helping once opens a door I cannot close? This is how kindness collapses in modern societies. Not loudly, not violently, but quietly, under layers of reasoning that sound responsible. Here, compassion is no longer an instinctive act. It is a liability assessment. People do not ask, is this child thirsty? They ask, what could go wrong if I help? And in that subtle shift, from need to risk, abundance begins to rot. Because abundance, when paired with fear, does not create generosity. It creates defensiveness. The more a society owns, the more it has to lose. And the more it fears the unpredictable. The irony is almost unbearable. Civilizations that engineered purification plants, underground pipes, and digital monitoring systems forgot the moral memory that once made water sacred. Once, offering water was a command older than law. Now it is filtered through policy, suspicion, and self-protection. The child did not become invisible because people were heartless. The child became invisible because systems trained people to pause, to delegate responsibility, to wait for permission before acting human. And caution, when standing before vulnerability, rarely announces itself as fear. It dresses as logic. It speaks in calm tones. It insists it is reasonable. But reason, stripped of mercy, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a justification for walking away. Chapter 3. Fear wearing a civilized face. In some places, refusal did not arrive as cruelty. It arrived smiling. I'm sorry. I really can't. It's not allowed. The words were gentle. The tone was polite. The denial was complete. Rules were cited with confidence. Policies were invoked like shields. Responsibility was quietly passed upward, to managers, to regulations, to invisible authorities that never appear when mercy is needed. This is how modern morality now operates. We no longer say, I chose not to help. We say, I am not permitted to. The difference matters. Because choice implies responsibility. Permission dissolves it. Fear, in its modern form, does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not even look afraid. It wears professionalism. It speaks calmly. It hides behind procedures that sound reasonable and feel safe. The child did not pose a danger. There was no weapon, no disruption, no demand beyond survival. And yet, vulnerability itself has become suspicious. In a world trained to anticipate scams, lawsuits, accusations, and regret, innocence feels out of place. An unscripted request is treated like a risk. A spontaneous act of kindness is seen as a breach of protocol. And so, anomalies are not confronted. They are avoided. Not because people lack empathy, but because they have been taught that empathy must be authorized. Here, morality has not vanished. It has been outsourced to governments that move slowly, to institutions that require forms, to systems that protect against error, but not against indifference. And in that outsourcing, something subtle is lost. When everyone waits for permission, no one feels responsible. When everyone follows the rules, no one breaks them for mercy. The refusal, then, is not personal. It is procedural, and that may be the most frightening form of fear there is. Chapter 4. The place that did not hesitate. Then the child arrived in one country where something quietly extraordinary occurred. Nothing dramatic announced it. No crowd gathered. No camera lenses adjusted. There was simply no hesitation. No narrowing of the eyes to search for motive. No pause long enough to calculate consequence. No silent negotiation between fear and kindness. A stranger reached for water as naturally as one reaches for breath. Not to be filmed, not to be praised, not to tell a story later, but because refusing water felt unthinkable, as if the act itself would violate something older than logic. In this place, water is not treated as a commodity. It is treated as a responsibility. Something that must move when life stands in front of it. Hospitality here is not performative. It does not wait for witnesses. It does not depend on applause. It is reflexive. The culture remembers what many modern societies have mislaid. That denying water to the thirsty is not neutrality. It is not caution. It is not policy. It is a moral failure. This moment had nothing to do with wealth. Nothing to do with infrastructure or economic ranking. Nothing to do with development charts or global praise. It had everything to do with memory. Values carried not in documents, but in stories, rituals, faith, and habit, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Here, giving water predates law. It predates bureaucracy. It predates explanation. The child drank. No speeches followed. No moral lessons were announced. And yet, in that ordinary, unnoticed moment, an entire society passed a test it did not know it was taking. Not because it tried to be good, but because it never considered being anything else. Chapter 5. What this reveals about us. This was never about the child. The child was a mirror, held up not to individuals, but to entire civilizations. What we saw reflected was not kindness or cruelty in isolation, but the moral architecture beneath everyday behavior. So the question was never, who is kind? Kindness can be spontaneous. It can be performative. It can disappear under pressure. The real question was far more unsettling. Who still believes that survival should not require justification? Because somewhere along the path of progress, many societies made a quiet trade. They replaced moral instinct with protocol. They replaced trust with suspicion. They replaced responsibility with procedure. And they called it safety. In these places, compassion is no longer assumed. It must be explained, documented, authorized. Need is not met, it is evaluated. Then there are others, very few, who still treat mercy not as a favor, but as an obligation that precedes thought. In these cultures, offering water is not generosity. It is continuity, an inherited memory that says, life comes first, explanations come later. This is the uncomfortable truth we avoid confronting. Progress does not guarantee humanity. Education does not guarantee empathy. Wealth does not guarantee decency. Sometimes, the most technologically advanced societies are the slowest to respond to suffering. Because they have learned how to rationalize delay. They have mastered the language of reasons. They know how to sound correct while doing nothing. And sometimes, the societies dismissed as less modern remember something essential. Not because they are better, but because they have not yet forgotten. They remember that life itself is the highest value. That survival is not a request to be reviewed. That water should never require persuasion. And that memory, more than any invention, may be what decides which civilizations endure. Chapter 6. The question that remains. If a child asked you for water, would you pause long enough to ask permission to be human? Would your mind begin to calculate outcomes before your hands moved? Would you scan the situation for risk, liability, or consequence? Or would your body already know what to do? Because the future will not be judged by our machines. It will not be judged by the speed of our networks, the height of our towers, or the sophistication of our systems. It will be judged by our reflexes, by the choices made in seconds, before logic edits compassion, before fear reframes mercy, before responsibility is delegated elsewhere. Not by what we claim to believe, not by the values printed in constitutions or spoken in ceremonies, but by what we did before thinking. A civilization is not measured by its architecture or efficiency. It is measured by how it responds to vulnerability, especially when no one is watching, especially when there is no reward. It is measured by how quickly it answers a request, so small it should never be refused. May I have some water? Only one country answered without hesitation. Only one treated the question as settled long before it was asked. The rest of us responded with explanations, with policies, with reasons that sounded intelligent and felt necessary. But history does not remember explanations. It remembers moments. And this moment will linger, not because of who failed, but because it forces a question that has no comfortable answer. When survival asks politely, do we still know how to respond? This was not a story about geography. It was a story about conscience. If this unsettled you, good. If it made you reflect, better. Because Twisted Chapter exists to expose the quiet truths hiding beneath normal life. If you believe stories like this matter, subscribe, like, share your thoughts below. The next chapter may not be about a child, but it will be about us.